Her daughter and son-in-law laughed about her shoes. Right there, on the porch of her own lake house. Carolyn Wells, retired librarian and widow, didn't correct them. She just smiled, finished her tea, and waited. By morning, the county records would confirm what they'd forgotten. Every acre, every wall, every stone still bore her name alone. She'd spent a lifetime being their mother. Now, she was their lesson. And when they came for her house, she didn't argue, she documented. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The lake house rose out of the trees like a secret no one wanted to share. Tall, weather-worn, with ivy clinging to its stone chimney and wood siding that creaked with every wind shift. The late afternoon sun shimmered on the lake's surface, throwing light into the open windows as the first car pulled up the gravel drive, tires crunching slow and deliberate. Carolyn stepped out first. Her gray cardigan hung neatly over a cream blouse, buttoned high at the neck. Her shoes, soft beige orthopedic walkers, sank into the gravel as she moved with careful precision. She paused, gazing up at the lake house like someone revisiting a crime scene. Her fingers clutched a cloth tote that read, "Fresh starts don't expire." The screen door banged open. "Carolyn, you made it," Patrice's voice rang out too high, too bright. She waved from the porch in her sleeveless floral sundress, one hand gripping a sweating mimosa glass, the other pressed lightly against Lauren's arm beside her. Carolyn gave a small smile and a nod, but no wave. Behind her, the rest of the family spilled out. Emily, 22, earbuds half in, eyeing everything like a documentary subject. Eli followed, phone in hand, distractedly checking reception. The car behind them idled before cutting off, spitting up a small cloud of dust. Ruth emerged from the driver's side, sunglasses still on, lips pursed like she was already regretting something. Patrice leaned in toward Lauren, lowering her voice just enough to be dangerous. "Did you see her shoes?" she murmured, eyes never leaving Carolyn. "She looks like the maid." Lauren snorted behind her glass, brushing an invisible fleck from her silk blouse. "It's giving retirement home." Eli caught it. His smirk was immediate, but he turned away, thumbing through his notifications like he hadn't heard a thing. Carolyn didn't flinch. She didn't turn, didn't pause her step as she moved toward the porch with that same quiet dignity she'd always worn like armor. But Emily, standing just a few paces behind, did hear every word. She blinked once, slow, then shifted her gaze to her mother's back. Ruth, still standing by the car with her arms crossed, watched the entire exchange from behind her sunglasses. Not a word passed her lips, but her jaw set just slightly. "Room assignments are on the fridge," Patrice announced cheerfully as the group funneled inside, pretending nothing had been said. "Carolyn, you're downstairs in the little guest room with the twin bed. I know stairs can be tough." Carolyn nodded again, still without comment. She took her time crossing the foyer, her shoes quiet on the wood floor, eyes skimming the wall where family photos hung, all in mismatched frames. Smiling faces, decades of them. Her face was there too, but always on the edge, never center. Inside the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed under the weight of magnets, handwritten notes, and a chore wheel made for the grandkids. Emily hovered nearby, pretending to read a grocery list. "You okay?" she asked softly, eyes still on the fridge. Carolyn opened a drawer and placed her tote inside, smoothing it gently. "Of course." Emily didn't believe it. "They were talking about your shoes." "I know." The silence sat between them like steam rising from a kettle. Soft but building. Upstairs, laughter burst from one of the bedrooms. Patrice's voice again, loud and caring. "Honestly, I thought she might have died in Florida and no one told us." Emily's head turned. Carolyn didn't. "I'm going for a walk before dinner," Carolyn said, already reaching for the screened back door. "I'll come," Emily offered, but Carolyn shook her head. Not this time. The door swung shut behind her with a sigh. Outside, the air was crisp and smelled faintly of pine and barbecue charcoal. Carolyn took the narrow path down to the lake, her feet crunching the dried needles and leaves beneath. Her back straightened with each step. The further she got from the house, the more her breath seemed to come easier. She reached the old dock, graying boards and rusted nails, and sat at the edge, letting her shoes dangle above the water. Behind her, in the trees, a branch cracked. Carolyn didn't move, but her eyes flicked toward the sound. A second crack, closer, and then silence. She waited, counted. 1, 2. Thought you'd hide out here, a voice said softly. She turned. It was Ruth, but her expression wasn't casual, and she wasn't alone. Carolyn didn't stand. She kept her feet dangling just above the water, watching the small ripples slide across the surface, like they had something to say, but didn't want to be the first to speak. Ruth stepped onto the dock. The boards groaned, old wood protesting the weight of something heavier than footsteps. Tension, maybe. The man behind her, tall, mid-40s, wore a soft-worn blazer and boat shoes too clean for the lake. His expression was unreadable, but polite, the way a professional wears distance like a badge. I told Thomas you wouldn't be surprised, Ruth said, nodding to the man behind her. Carolyn's gaze lifted slowly. You brought my lawyer to a family weekend? I didn't bring him, Ruth said evenly. He was already in town for something, and I asked him to confirm something for you, or maybe for them. Thomas gave a short, deferential nod. Carolyn, good to see you again. Carolyn didn't offer a greeting back. She just turned her attention back to the water. What did Ruth ask you to confirm? The deed, he said. She mentioned there's been some confusion. She mentioned, Carolyn repeated, her voice like a dry page turning. Ruth took a step closer. They're acting like they own the place. Eli keeps talking about tearing out the boathouse. Lauren's drawing up seating charts in your living room like it's the damn Four Seasons. You're barely in the room before they're planning what to gut next. Carolyn said nothing. Thomas cleared his throat gently. I ran a quick title search this morning, just to be sure. The property is still solely in your name. You and Mark purchased it 18 years ago as joint tenants with right of survivorship. When he passed, full ownership transferred to you. Ruth nodded, like she needed the confirmation spoken aloud. They act like they're standing on their own land, but they're not. It's yours. You think I didn't know that? Carolyn said softly, more to the lake than to them. Her voice wasn't angry. It was something flatter, steadier, older. I signed the damn mortgage, paid off every penny. Thomas hesitated. I can file a quiet title action. It's not necessary legally, but it could make things simpler should any dispute arise down the line, especially if anyone starts making moves, thinking this house is communal property, Ruth snorted. Like Eli. Carolyn finally stood, slow but deliberate. She turned to face them. The wind picked up slightly, pushing her cardigan back off her shoulders like wings about to open. Go ahead, she said to Thomas. File it. Quiet title. Confirm the county records. Whatever makes things clearer. Thomas nodded again. I'll email the documentation this evening. You'll just need to sign. As he stepped back onto the path and disappeared into the trees, Ruth stayed behind. You waited too long to correct them, she said quietly. Now they think you're weak. Or worse, invisible. Carolyn's eyes narrowed slightly. Let them think what they want. The truth doesn't lose sleep. Ruth gave a short, humorless laugh. That would have been a great line to use before Eli started telling people this was already his. I'm not here to convince them of anything. No, Ruth said, crossing her arms. But you should be here to remind them. The lake shimmered behind them, gold light bending into the water as the sun began to drop. Somewhere behind the house, a screen door slammed. Laughter carried again, this time Lauren's. You know, Ruth said, voice low. It's funny how people build castles on land they don't hold. Carolyn's lips curved, just barely. Let them build, she said. It makes the fall more painful. Ruth studied her a moment. You really planning to stay quiet all weekend? I'm planning to stay smart. They stood in silence a beat longer. Then Ruth turned and headed back toward the house, her steps sharp, sure, like someone who'd just chosen a side. Carolyn lingered on the dock alone, eyes scanning the trees like they might offer something she hadn't seen before. Her face didn't change, but she gripped the edge of the railing with one hand. And in the quiet, her knuckles whitened. Inside the house, Emily stood in the hallway near the fridge, half listening. She wasn't supposed to have heard what Eli had just said on the phone, but she had. She pressed her back against the wall and slowly slid down, heart thudding. Eli had called someone, and the words were still ringing in her ears. The deed's not a problem. She won't live long enough to stop anything. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, and too many hidden motives. The long farmhouse table, once Carolyn's pride, now bore 3 mismatched floral arrangements and gold-rimmed wine glasses that weren't hers. Someone had set place cards. Emily sat stiffly beside her mother, fork untouched, gaze flicking between faces like she was trying to solve a crime in real time. At the head of the table, Eli leaned back in the high-backed chair as if it had been carved for him. "We're just glad everyone could make it this year," he said, with a charming grin, gesturing down the table. "There's nothing like the lake and fall. Feels like home." Lauren jumped in, wine already softening her edges. "Honestly, we love being able to share our space like this." Her voice rose just enough to suggest performance. "When Eli and I started hosting the reunion here, we just wanted it to feel open, warm, like it belonged to everyone." Carolyn chewed quietly, slowly, eyes down. Her knife barely made a sound against the plate. Emily glanced at her. Nothing in Carolyn's posture changed, but her grip on the fork hadn't relaxed in several minutes. "Oh, please," Patrice said with a laugh, raising her glass in a dainty clink against Lauren's. "The lake looks better when you own it, doesn't it?" She looked across the table directly at Carolyn as she said it. Silence rippled out like a stone dropped in deep water. Carolyn dabbed the corner of her mouth with her napkin. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost polite. "Yes," she said. "It's brought me a lot of peace over the years." Eli shifted, just slightly. His hand twitched toward his wine, then stopped. Emily caught it. Lauren's laugh faltered a hair too long. "Well, it certainly feels like ours. Right, babe?" Eli recovered fast. "It's all family at the end of the day." Carolyn looked up then, not at him, but just past him, as if seeing something out the window behind his head. "Not all families understand the value of what they're given," she said. Another silence, this one heavier. Emily's pulse kicked up. Her fork scraped gently against the plate, an involuntary sound in an increasingly volatile room. Ruth set down her glass, slow and precise. "You didn't correct them." Carolyn didn't turn. "Not yet." That landed. Patrice blinked. "Correct who? About what?" Carolyn finally looked around the table. Her gaze moved from Patrice to Lauren to Eli. Slow, steady, disarming. "There's something about silence," she said lightly, as if she were commenting on the wine. "It gives people just enough rope." The table stayed still. Even the candles seemed to lean in. From outside came the soft creak of a shutter swinging in the breeze. Eli chuckled, forcing casualness. "Anyway, if anyone wants seconds, the kitchen's still warm." "Actually," Ruth said, pushing back from the table, "I think I'll help myself now. Carolyn?" Carolyn nodded, setting her napkin on the table. "Walk with me." They rose together. Emily stood too, unthinking. No," Carolyn said gently. "You stay. Listen." Emily froze. Ruth and Carolyn disappeared into the kitchen, their steps soft against the polished wood. The moment they were gone, Eli leaned toward Lauren. Voice low but not low enough. "That woman is going to be a problem." Emily didn't blink. "She already is," Lauren murmured, sipping from her glass. In the kitchen, Ruth stood beside the fridge, arms crossed. "They're cornering themselves," she said. Carolyn opened a drawer and retrieved a folded piece of paper, pale blue, edges curled from handling. She passed it to Ruth. "What is this?" "County record. Filed this morning. Title confirmation." Ruth scanned it, her face darkening. "Quiet title approved?" Carolyn nodded. "Let's see how homey it feels when the sheriff shows up with a certified copy." Back at the table, Emily sat frozen. Patrice was talking again, something vapid about the neighbor's boat. But Emily's ears were ringing, because as she looked across the table, she caught the edge of Eli's phone glowing under the tablecloth. And the text message still sitting on his screen. "Make it look natural. No autopsy." The morning sun broke slow over the pines, casting long shadows across the gravel drive. The lake shimmered like a secret barely holding itself together. Inside, the house stirred with clinking coffee mugs and the sound of Patrice describing her dream in unnecessary detail. Lauren yawned theatrically and opened the French doors, just as the rumble of a vehicle rolled up the hill. A white delivery van coasted to a stop at the edge of the clearing. Eli came out from the back hallway, t-shirt wrinkled, eyes half open. "Anyone order something?" "Not me," Lauren said, pulling her robe tight at the waist. "Unless it's that caviar spread Mom told me about." But that was supposed to be Monday. Patrice floated toward the porch, mimosa in hand. "Maybe it's the charcuterie board for tonight." The driver hopped out and swung open the van's back doors. He carefully lifted out a wide rectangular box, the kind with too much bubble wrap and a layer of responsibility inside. "Delivery for Wells' house?" He glanced down at his clipboard. "Carolyn Wells?" Lauren blinked. "Wait, Wells' house." Eli stepped forward. "Hold up. Who sent that?" The driver looked confused. It was prepaid. Custom order from River Brass Engraving. Instructions were to hand deliver. Says install by east-facing path entrance. Before anyone could say more, Carolyn stepped out onto the porch. She wore the same soft gray cardigan, sleeves rolled up to the wrist. Her shoes crunched lightly on the gravel as she walked straight toward the van. "I did," she said simply. Lauren's face twisted slightly. "You ordered a plaque?" Carolyn nodded to the driver. "It goes at the head of the walkway, left of the stone steps." Eli's jaw worked once, then tightened. "What the hell does it say?" The driver pulled off the remaining layer of padding and revealed the polished brass. "Wells' House, EST 2005. The letters gleamed in the sunlight like they'd always been meant to live there. Patrice gave a sharp laugh, not quite amused. "But Eli," Carolyn turned to her, tone gentle but unshakable, "never signed a single document. Not when we bought it, not when we paid it off, not when we refinanced." She looked over her shoulder at Eli. He just liked the view. Eli's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Lauren spoke instead. "Is this really necessary?" Carolyn didn't flinch. "No," she said. "It's overdue." The driver looked from one face to the next, then wisely moved to install the plaque, kneeling with a drill and level, pretending not to hear the tension thickening behind him. Carolyn turned without waiting for further reaction and walked back inside, her steps measured, unhurried. The screen door didn't slam. It closed with the soft finality of someone who didn't need volume to make a point. Patrice stood blinking at the plaque like it was written in another language. Lauren's voice came quiet but sharp. "She's trying to embarrass you." Eli didn't respond. He just stared at the name, Wells' House, as if seeing it had rewritten something inside him. Ruth stepped up beside Patrice, folding her arms. "Funny thing about silence," she murmured. "Yours makes more noise than all their speeches combined." Patrice gave a small, scoffing laugh. "It's a name on a sign." Ruth looked her dead in the eyes. "No, it's a name on your exit ticket. You just haven't felt the ground give out yet." Back inside, Carolyn stood in the kitchen, staring at the sink. Emily entered, eyes still wary from the night before. "Mom," Carolyn turned. "There's something I need to tell you," Emily said, voice low. "About Eli." Before she could speak again, the front door opened fast. Too fast. Eli stood there, hand still on the knob, breathing tight. "Why did you do that?" Carolyn didn't blink. "Do what?" He took a slow step inside. "That sign, you knew exactly what it would stir up." Carolyn's voice came cold and calm. "I didn't do it to stir. I did it so no one would confuse whose house this is." Emily stepped between them instinctively, but Carolyn raised a hand, stopping her. "I have no intention of debating this," she said. "I have paperwork." Eli's lips twisted into something between a smile and a snarl. Then he said it in soft and almost amused. "You might have the house, Carolyn, but I control what happens in it." The email hit Thomas's inbox at 7:12 a.m. sharp, stamped with the county's seal and flagged urgent. His phone buzzed on the nightstand beside his half-full glass of bourbon from the night before. He skimmed the subject line, then sat up straighter. "Notice of property exemption fraud, Wells' House." By 7:18, Carolyn had the forwarded message in her inbox. She was already dressed when it came through. Oatmeal on the stove, slippers swapped for real shoes. Downstairs, the house was still waking. Muffled footsteps upstairs, a faucet running. Lauren's laugh cutting through the air like it had something to prove. Carolyn tapped reply. No fanfare, no emotion, just the scanned deed attached and the quiet satisfaction of watching a lie collapse under the weight of paperwork. At 7:23, Thomas called. They tried to file under Lauren's name, he said, skipping pleasantries. Some kind of homeowner's tax exemption. Her signature's on it. Carolyn stirred her oatmeal. Filed when? Time-stamped yesterday morning. Same day I pulled your title. She filed before the plaque went up, Carolyn said softly, almost to herself. Thomas's voice lowered. The exemption's been denied and flagged. The assessor's office is reviewing it for fraud. Carolyn clicked off the burner. Let them. She hung up. By breakfast, the mood was brittle. The family sat around the table again, more forced this time, more wary. Lauren wore a pristine blouse, but her smile had the teeth behind it. She barely touched her croissant. Eli scrolled absently through his phone, thumb unmoving on the screen. The news hadn't gone public yet, but something in Lauren's posture betrayed it. A stiffness around the shoulders, a too-wide laugh that came when no one had told a joke. Ruth sipped her coffee, dark and plain. So, no update on the shared property narrative. Patrice blinked, confused. Lauren glanced up quickly, then looked away. Ruth turned to Carolyn, tone dry. Guess she tripped over your paperwork. Carolyn didn't smile. I told them to watch their step. Emily watched her mother carefully. Something had shifted, not in what Carolyn said, but what she didn't. Later, when the others drifted out to the porch, Emily stayed behind. She stood at the sink while Carolyn wiped down the counter. Why didn't you ever say anything? Emily asked quietly. All these years, you just let them talk like this wasn't yours. Carolyn didn't look up. Because ownership doesn't shout, she said. It signs. Emily blinked. Carolyn finally met her gaze. And now they've signed too. Just the wrong name. Footsteps approached behind them. Lauren entered the kitchen like a storm barely held back by her heels. Her eyes locked on Carolyn's. You think this proves something? Carolyn calmly folded the dish towel. It proves enough, she said, to the county, and to anyone else who cares about facts. Lauren stepped closer. You don't get it. We've already built something here. Everyone sees this as ours, mine and Eli's. Carolyn didn't move. Then you should have built it on truth. I'm not scared of your papers. You should be scared of the law, Ruth said, appearing in the doorway behind Lauren, arms crossed. Because it doesn't care who catered brunch. Lauren turned, startled. You're enjoying this. Ruth didn't deny it. I enjoy seeing people walk into walls they built themselves. Carolyn quietly stepped past them both. As she walked into the hallway, her phone buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. Voicemail received. She played it. Ms. Wells, this is Detective Marley out of Knox County. We received a complaint from the assessor's office. Forged exemption request. We'll need a statement. And we have a few other concerns about recent activity around the property, including an anonymous tip regarding possible foul play. Please call back. Carolyn froze. In the living room, Emily appeared, eyes wide. Was that who I think it was? Carolyn nodded slowly. Outside, Eli stood near the lake, phone to his ear, pacing. A hawk cut across the sky above him, wings slicing clean through morning air. Inside, the voicemail played again. The word foul play echoed like a bell no one could unring. The mid-morning air was warm but heavy, the kind that made glass sweat and tempers stew. The breakfast dishes had barely been cleared when Patrice found Carolyn out on the porch, placing a fresh pitcher of iced tea on the wicker side table like she'd always belonged to the house she'd built. Carolyn, Patrice began, voice syrupy sweet but quivering underneath. Can I ask you something? Carolyn looked up from the mint leaves she was arranging into the pitcher. Of course. Patrice glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one else was nearby. So this ownership thing, it's really just you? Yes, Carolyn said simply. Always has been. Patrice blinked. Even then, Patrice exhaled like she'd bitten a lemon. You're just trying to embarrass them. Carolyn met her gaze without flinching. If they're embarrassed, it's not by me. From inside came the muffled sound of raised voices. Lauren likely. Eli hadn't come down since the call. Emily had spotted him earlier, standing on the edge of the lake again, jaw clenched, phone in his palm like a grenade he hadn't decided whether to throw or not. Patrice scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. It just seems cruel, Carolyn. Humiliating them like this. The sign, the paperwork, the investigator. I didn't file a fraudulent tax document, Carolyn said calmly, and I didn't tip off the county. But the truth has a way of knocking on the door whether you're ready or not. Ruth stepped outside, coffee in hand, leaning against the porch post like she'd been there the whole time. This is why you don't build on borrowed foundation, she said. Looks real until the ground shifts. Patrice gave her a glare. You're loving this, Ruth shrugged. Not loving, just watching. Lauren appeared in the doorway, her expression so composed it betrayed the cracks underneath. Mother, Patrice, she said tightly. Can we not air this in front of the whole damn neighborhood? Carolyn poured herself a glass of tea, the ice clinking gently. We're on 37 acres. The only one hearing this is the wind. Lauren's mouth pressed into a hard line. We're guests, Carolyn. You don't treat people like this. No, Carolyn said, tilting her head. You don't. Lauren turned and walked back inside, the screen door snapping hard behind her. Emily emerged seconds later, stepping past Ruth and perching on the porch railing beside her mother. Her eyes were still shadowed with worry from the voicemail that morning, but there was something new in them too. A quiet awe maybe, or clarity. I didn't think you'd be this calm, Emily said softly. They deserve this, Ruth muttered, sipping her coffee. Emily kept her eyes on her mother. But still, you're not gloating, you're just still. Carolyn gave a faint smile. That's because I've already lived the fire. This is just the smoke clearing. Emily nodded, her throat tight. Inside the house, footsteps pounded down the hallway, fast, urgent. It was Eli. He walked past the porch windows, grabbing his keys from the hook and heading straight for the front door. Where are you going? Lauren called from the kitchen. He didn't answer. Carolyn stood. Emily, she said softly. Emily rose too, instantly alert. Something's wrong. Ruth squinted toward the driveway. His hands were shaking. Carolyn stepped back inside, her voice suddenly firm. Where is he going? She asked Lauren. Lauren crossed her arms, defensive. Don't ask me. He's been on edge since. From outside, the engine roared to life. Emily moved to the door and threw it open just in time to see Eli's SUV peel down the gravel driveway in a cloud of dust, wheels skidding at the bend. Carolyn's hand tightened around the door frame. Ruth stepped in beside her. Carolyn? Carolyn's voice was low, steady, but her eyes were sharp with something new. He's not driving away from the problem. She turned toward Emily. He's driving toward it. The sun hung high, casting long shadows across the porch as if the house itself was bracing for something. Inside, the energy shifted, quieter but more focused. Eli was gone, for now. Carolyn sat at the dining room table with a pot of tea between her and Thomas, who'd arrived less than 20 minutes after she texted him. I brought the drafts, he said, laying the folder on the table with care. Everything's exactly as we discussed. Living trust structure. You retain full control. After that, it passes. Per your instructions. Carolyn opened the folder. Her fingers were steady, her breath even, but something about her silence made the room feel heavier. Emily sat across from her, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes scanning every page as Thomas turned them over. Ruth stood just inside the kitchen archway, arms crossed, watching without interrupting. She hadn't asked what this was about. She'd already known. Carolyn reached for her teacup, took one sip, then gently set it aside. I want it recorded before the sun sets. Thomas nodded. It will be. I brought the notary. Ruth stepped forward, pulling her wallet from her purse. Already covered, she said, flipping it open to reveal her commission card. You signed my wedding license. Least I can do is sign your freedom. Thomas passed her the designated signature pages. Carolyn picked up the pen. Emily blinked. Mom, are you sure? Carolyn looked at her. I've never been more. Her signature moved with grace, not rushed, not hesitant, just firm, deliberate. Emily reached for the pen, her throat tightening. I don't know what to say. You don't have to, Carolyn replied. The trust speaks for me. Ruth slid the documents into a large envelope, sealed it with a neat strip of gold tape, and handed it back to Carolyn. I'll put it in the lake house safe, Carolyn said. No, Ruth said. We'll put it there. They moved together down the narrow hallway past old picture frames, their footsteps soft but sure. At the far end, Carolyn pulled back a throw rug and knelt beside the built-in floor safe. A 4-digit code, a soft click. The heavy door eased open. Inside sat a few family photo negatives, a faded insurance policy, and a fireproof pouch holding the original deed. Carolyn placed the trust envelope beside it, not on top. Equal weight. As she closed the door, she paused for a moment, hand resting on the safe's edge. Emily knelt beside her. Why now? Carolyn didn't look at her. Because control is louder when you don't have to raise your voice. She turned the lock. A quiet click echoed louder than any argument ever had. An hour later, Ruth and Thomas had gone. Carolyn stood alone in the living room, watching the wind ripple through the lake. The plaque outside gleamed gold in the sunlight. Behind her, Emily returned from the mailbox, holding something in her hand. A letter, she said. No return address. Hand-delivered. It was tucked inside the box. Carolyn took it, eyes narrowing slightly. The paper was thick, cream-colored, heavy. She unfolded it carefully. Just one sentence. Handwritten in blue ink. You can sign all you want. It doesn't change what's coming. Carolyn read it twice, then a third time. Her breath didn't quicken, but her spine did straighten. Emily's voice was tight. Is that from Eli? Carolyn didn't answer. She folded the note, tucked it into her pocket, and turned toward the hallway. Where are you going? Emily asked. Carolyn's voice was soft. To see what else he thinks I won't find. The afternoon sun had dipped just enough to bathe the porch in warm golden light, the kind that makes everything look sweeter than it is. Lauren stood in the center of the frame, chin tilted slightly, her wine glass held just high enough to sparkle. Eli, freshly returned and freshly silent, stood beside her with a neutral expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. Patrice, of course, positioned herself like a throw pillow, decorative but very intentional. Get one from the side too, Lauren instructed the teenage niece, holding the phone. Wider angle, get the house in the background. Emily stepped out onto the porch just as the camera clicked. She paused. Carolyn was standing off to the side, not hiding, just not needed, not asked, not in the frame. She sipped her iced tea quietly, watching the performance unfold like she'd seen it 100 times and no longer cared about the script. No one invited her to join. Patrice turned as the last photo was taken and saw her, gave a little wave. Oh, we just wanted one of the hosts. You understand. Carolyn nodded, pleasant as pie. Emily blinked, trying to process what she'd just seen. A slow burn started behind her ribs. Later, as the house cooled and the sun began to fade, Emily found Carolyn alone in the dining room, sitting in the same chair she'd signed the trust from hours earlier. Her face was peaceful, her hands still. That was disgusting, Emily said. Carolyn looked up from her tea. They needed a picture, not a memory. Emily crossed her arms. They erased you. Ruth entered behind her, setting a dish down on the sideboard. She handed you a message, she said, her voice even. You handed her a trust. Emily turned. You're okay with this? I'm not okay with anything, Ruth said. But I understand the terrain, and Carolyn's not building her legacy on group photos. Carolyn smiled faintly and stood, walking to the counter. A glossy 5x7 photo from earlier now sat there, freshly printed. Lauren must have used the wireless printer in the den. The three of them, Eli, Lauren, Patrice, beaming in front of Wells' house like it was theirs. Carolyn picked up a pen. No flourish, just 5 words, written neatly on the back of the photo. Image isn't ownership. CW. She laid it face down on the counter, didn't say a word. Emily watched her mother with something close to reverence. I used to think you were quiet because you didn't want to fight, she said. Carolyn looked at her. And now? I think you were just saving your breath for when it counted. Carolyn stepped toward her, reached out, and touched Emily's shoulder. You'll outlive their version of this, she said gently. Make sure your daughter doesn't forget mine. Emily blinked. I don't have a daughter. Not yet, Carolyn replied. Then she smiled. At that moment, the door swung open. Patrice stood in the doorway, holding the photo, the one Carolyn had left, her face pale. Did you write this? She asked sharply. Carolyn didn't even blink. I did. You're being cruel. No, Carolyn said softly. I'm being clear. Behind Patrice, Eli and Lauren hovered, tension radiating between them like static before a lightning strike. Lauren stepped in, voice low and shaking with something not quite rage, more like panic under pressure. You're really going to leave things like this? Carolyn met her eyes. No, this isn't the ending. She turned to walk away. Lauren called after her. Then what is? Carolyn didn't answer, but from the hallway, Ruth's voice drifted in. She's just getting started. By the next morning, the lake was still, mirror flat, the kind of deceptive calm that makes people believe the storm has passed. Inside, however, something in the air had changed. Everyone moved quieter, as though even their footsteps were being weighed. Carolyn sat at the kitchen table, reading glasses low on her nose, her attention fixed on a thick folder of documents spread across the wood grain. The binder was divided into color-coded tabs: title, trust, taxes, insurance, legal contacts, bank accounts. Everything labeled in her steady handwriting. Ruth leaned over her shoulder. You're alphabetizing revenge now, she murmured. Carolyn didn't look up. No, I'm archiving peace. Emily entered from the hallway, hair still damp, notebook in hand. You've been at this since sunrise. Nearly, Carolyn said. If you want control to stay clean, you build a paper trail while they're still asleep. Thomas's voice crackled over speakerphone. The will is updated, he said. No family obligation clauses, per your request. You're under no duty to provide for any adult relatives unless you choose to. Perfect, Carolyn said. Would you like me to include Eli or Lauren in the residual clauses? Non-beneficiary acknowledgement, at least. No, Carolyn said, flipping a page. I don't need to name ghosts. Ruth gave a quiet chuckle. You sure you don't want a ceremonial signature party? Let them host it, Carolyn said. They like the sound of their own signatures more than what they sign. Emily looked at the binder, brow furrowed. This is all for me? For us, Carolyn corrected. You'll hold it when the time comes. But Ruth will guide you through every line. You'll never be cornered without proof. Emily touched the binder's cover, tracing the label. Wells House, full ownership binder. It feels heavy, she said. It should, Ruth answered. It carries everything they thought they'd taken. By mid-afternoon, the air was heavy with humidity. Lauren's voice carried faintly from the back patio, strained laughter, a little too bright. Patrice's gossiping tone trickled through the window screens. Eli appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 nights. Shirt wrinkled, jaw dark with stubble. He didn't look angry now, just unmoored. Is it true? He asked quietly. You still own everything? Carolyn didn't flinch. She turned a page in the binder, then closed it carefully. That was always true, Eli, she said. You just stopped asking. He stood there for a long moment. You didn't have to make it public. I didn't, she said evenly. Lauren did when she posed in front of my house. His throat bobbed. She feels humiliated. She feels seen, Carolyn corrected. That's different. He looked down, hands in his pockets, searching for words that didn't come. You're making it sound like punishment. Carolyn's tone was measured, polite, precise. It's not punishment, it's record-keeping. Eli nodded slowly, his expression flickering. Confusion, guilt, something else darker behind the eyes. What happens now? That depends on what you do next, Carolyn said. He opened his mouth to respond, but didn't. Instead, he turned and walked out, the screen door shutting softly behind him. Ruth exhaled. He's a fuse with legs. Carolyn started gathering the papers back into the binder. Let him walk. The truth doesn't need to chase anyone. Emily stepped forward, sliding a final page under the binder cover. Done, she said quietly. Carolyn smiled. Good, then it's time to lock it away. They carried it together down the hall to the safe, opened the door, and placed the binder inside next to the trust envelope. For a moment, the 3 women stood there, a quiet trinity of intent. Then from the foyer, a sound. A low mechanical hum. Emily frowned. What is that? Ruth's voice dropped. Generator. But it's too early for it to kick in. Carolyn straightened. Check the main breaker. Emily turned toward the hallway, but then froze. because through the window, a thin wisp of black smoke was curling up from the side of the house. Ruth stepped forward, eyes narrowing. "Oh, hell," Carolyn's voice came low, steady, but colder than before. "He's not just testing me anymore." The fire department arrived fast, not because someone called, but because someone else already had. By the time Carolyn, Ruth, and Emily reached the side yard, the source was obvious. A melted extension cord, wrapped in a tangle around a rusting portable generator, half hidden beneath a warped plastic storage bin. The grass around it smoldered in a wide semicircle, charred earth curling like paper under heat. "Back," the fire chief barked, motioning them toward the driveway. His team swarmed, cutting the power line at the source. One young firefighter knelt and lifted the bin with gloved hands. It was empty underneath. Ruth crossed her arms, face hard. That cord didn't short by itself. Carolyn didn't reply. She was already watching the fence line. Across the property, just barely in view through the haze, stood Lauren and Patrice, frozen like statues under a pink parasol. Lauren held her phone loosely at her side. Patrice was talking too fast, her hands flying in small, frantic circles. They hadn't expected the fire to stay contained. Carolyn turned back toward the house. "Let's go inside." The dining room table had become a war desk, papers sprawled across the surface. Receipts, insurance policies, historical filings, hard drives blinking quietly at the corners. Emily keyed in another password as Ruth read off line items from a stapled ledger marked Patrice E. Stanton, request for estate exemption. Filed again. Different phrasing, but same form. She's trying to argue that Lauren qualifies as a dependent beneficiary through cohabitative goodwill, Ruth said, eyes scanning the page. Whatever that means. "She's recycling rejected language," Carolyn murmured, and timing it with the inspection season. If the fire had spread, she'd claim sabotage, emotional trauma, loss of future earnings. Ruth dropped the papers onto the table. "It's not even sloppy. It's desperate." Emily stood. "I'll pull up the exemption timestamps. If she filed it right before the smoke started, that's a coordinated act." Carolyn nodded. "Do it?" She crossed to the sideboard and unlocked the small cabinet that housed her printer. Sliding out a sealed folder marked IRS Correspondence, Stanton and Allen, she withdrew 3 notarized documents. Then she picked up her phone. "Thomas," she said, "flag the exemption, again, include the fire incident." His voice was clipped. "Already saw it on the back end. They tried to push it through the legacy portal. That triggers auto audit now. Add the formal fraud alert. I'm submitting the documentation tonight." "You want me to issue a cease and desist too?" Carolyn didn't hesitate. "Yes, make it final." "You understand that puts them in breach of federal notice. I'm counting on it." Thomas paused. "You've been more than generous, Carolyn." She hung up without responding. Later that night, the letter went out. Typed in plain language on Thomas's letterhead, it gave Patrice and Lauren 72 hours to retract any and all estate-related filings under their names. If they failed to comply, any future contact with government or legal entities regarding the Wells house or its financials would be treated as intentional fraud. All future filings will trigger formal legal action. The envelope wasn't sealed with malice, just clarity. Emily set it on the tray to be sent with the morning courier. "Will this actually scare them?" "No," Ruth said, arms crossed, "but it'll corner them." "They've gone from rude to reckless," Carolyn added. "They don't believe lines exist unless they're enforced." "They were never taught boundaries," Ruth said quietly. Emily looked toward the dark windows. "Or humility." Across the lake, lights flickered on inside Lauren's rental cottage. A shadow moved behind the curtains, pacing, then pausing, then pacing again. From this distance, it was impossible to tell if it was Lauren or Patrice. It didn't matter, because on Carolyn's screen, the system blinked twice. A notification she didn't expect. Ruth leaned in, frowning. "What is that?" Carolyn tapped to expand it. Another exemption request. But this one wasn't from Patrice. It was from Eli, filed under a corporate shell. And this time, it wasn't asking permission. It was claiming priority. The sun rose gray, not stormy, not clear, just washed out and waiting. Carolyn stood in the entryway, dressed in slate blue, her hair pinned up the same way it had been the day she signed the original purchase contract for the Wells house, nearly 35 years ago. Her hands moved calmly over the file folder in front of her. A thick one, stamped in raised ink, Wells Trust, executed copy. She sealed it with a final strip of tape, then pressed her thumb into the closure like she was locking a door. Ruth stood across from her, arms loose at her sides. No edits? No edits, Carolyn said. You don't want to add anything for Eli? Carolyn paused, then shook her head once. Decisions made in silence are the most final. She turned the sealed file in her hands, just once, then walked it over to the carved console table by the door. It sat next to the small box of keys labeled Deposit Vault, 5th District Trust. Ruth stepped forward, eyes searching her friend's expression. So that's it. No back door, no soft clause. No, Carolyn said simply. Not this time. She didn't sound angry, just finished. At exactly 3:17 p.m., a message pinged to Carolyn's phone. Lauren Allen requesting brief meeting. Subject, apology, clarification. It arrived without punctuation, without a subject line, and without the one thing that might have mattered. Acknowledgement. Carolyn didn't respond, but 2 hours later, there was a knock at the side porch. Lauren stood there in flats too clean for the gravel path, her cardigan neatly folded over one arm like it would soften the conversation. She started, then glanced down at her hands. I just didn't want things to stay hostile. Carolyn didn't open the screen door. Lauren continued carefully. I regret how things were interpreted. That post wasn't meant to disrespect. I was proud. I thought. She caught herself. Anyway, I shouldn't have taken the photo. Still, she never said which photo, and she never once spoke the word whisper. Carolyn tilted her head slightly, as if evaluating a painting that didn't hang straight. You're not apologizing, she said calmly. You're just afraid you don't get to come back. Lauren blinked. That's not. But Carolyn had already stepped back. The screen door remained shut. She left Lauren standing there. And the silence didn't feel cruel. It felt earned. The bank vault sat 5 floors below the 5th District Trust and Holdings building, chilled and still as a crypt. Emily signed the register with quiet concentration, her signature now listed on the Wells House account as secondary executor. When the clerk stepped away, Carolyn handed over the sealed file and placed it in box 804B beside the notarized legacy ledger and an original copy of the property deed, the one bearing only her name, not Eli's, not Lauren's, just hers. Everything in there is cross-verified, she said, stepping back. If something happens to me, they can't fake their way around it. Emily nodded slowly. I'll know what to do. Outside the vault, Ruth was waiting near the elevators, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup with FDIC insured printed along the seam. You just handed her a legacy, she said as they walked out. Carolyn gave a small, satisfied nod. And a shield. That night, with the binders stored and the lights dimmed, Emily set about transferring the utilities. One account after another. Water, electric, property taxes, solar panel rebates. She input her name and account info, line by line, without asking for help. The bills came in digital now. There was no hiding behind envelopes anymore. She paused at the heating oil line. Is it okay if I set it to auto delivery? She asked. Carolyn looked up from the dining table, where she was drafting a final affidavit for Thomas. That's what owners do. Emily smiled faintly and clicked yes. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was steady and new. Outside, the moon sat low over the lake, its reflection broken into pieces by a restless ripple that hadn't been there the night before. Across the water, all was dark, until suddenly a sliver of light blinked on inside the old guest house. Not Lauren's, not Patrice's, Eli's. And from somewhere deep inside it, something metal scraped across wood. A drawer? A cabinet? Or something being unpacked. The notary had warm hands and a neutral smile. The kind of face that knew how to witness a decision without absorbing it. Sign there, she said softly, pointing to the final line. Then initial the margin next to the substitution clause. Carolyn did both without hesitation. Emily sat beside her, back straight, eyes locked on the words above her name. Medical power of attorney, durable, non-revocable. It didn't feel ceremonial. It felt surgical, quiet, permanent. "Does this mean I decide everything?" she asked after the notary left. "You decide anything that matters," Carolyn said, folding the paper into thirds. "When the time comes, you won't need permission." Emily didn't smile, but she nodded. Across the kitchen, Ruth stood by the window, watching wind ripple through the treetops. "That's what terrifies them," she said finally. Emily turned to her. "What?" "That someone like you didn't beg for a seat, but got the keys anyway." 2 hours later, Carolyn sat at the old desktop in the study. It hummed with a mechanical patience no one built into machines anymore. She toggled through layers of accounts, family holdings, dormant investment lines, security locks on 4 estate-linked checking routes. Each click required a 2-factor code. Each update sent a final notice to Eli and Lauren's emails. Removed, removed, removed. Her hands didn't shake once. She paused only at the joint savings fund labeled Alan Stanton Living Heirs. The balance was low, not worth a fight. She flagged it for review, then opened the folder marked Legacy Access. Active only, and verified the authorized signers. Just 2 names remained. Hers and Emily's. Ruth brought in the mail that evening. A thin stack, mostly flyers and subscription notices. Tucked between a political postcard and a property tax form was a printout of a family group chat. 16 bubbles, mismatched icons, messages that read like cocktail party scraps. "Who printed this?" Emily asked, flipping it over. "Lauren," Ruth said, pulling out a second page. It was in the return envelope with no note. Just this. Carolyn scanned the top. The thread had been renamed. Not Wells family, not homecoming week, just the real ones. She wasn't listed. Neither was Emily. Emily shrugged, handing it to Ruth like it was junk mail. "It's fine. I have real connection, not group texts." Carolyn met her eyes across the table. There was a steadiness in Emily now, not hardened, but tempered. Like something soft that had passed through fire and held its shape. "They think that chat makes them untouchable," Ruth said, flipping the pages into the trash. "But they're already extinct. They just haven't checked the mirror yet." Carolyn folded her hands over the tablecloth, voice even. "They wanted to humiliate me." "You rewrote the deed," Ruth replied. Carolyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I didn't rewrite," she said. "I just read it out loud." Outside, dusk wrapped the lake in silver. The guest house stayed dark. No sign of Eli since the light blinked out at 2 a.m. But in the quiet hours just before midnight, a single email hit Carolyn's inbox. No subject line, no greeting, just 2 attachments. One was a screenshot of the Wells House appraisal, with disputed title scrawled in digital ink. The second was a scanned invoice from a real estate litigation firm. The retainer was already paid, and the claim was marked in progress. The appraisal report sat open on Carolyn's desk, glossy and grim. It wasn't her home being devalued, it was theirs. 4 houses on the Alan Stanton side of the lake had gone up for sale within 2 months. 2 of them still empty, 1 newly staged, and the last listed as pending with contingencies. Prices had dropped by nearly 11% across the zip code, and the words disputed property line now appeared in the fine print of multiple listings. Carolyn clicked through the comps. One of them was Lauren's. The real estate agent's write-up was almost comical, all florals and fluff. Modern lakefront charm with shared generational history. But the inspection flag told the truth in a single red box. Property may be impacted by ongoing family litigation. She leaned back in her chair, let out a breath, and tapped the space bar to black out the screen. Litigation had a long memory, and a longer shadow. The knock came late, not frantic, not rude, just small. When Carolyn opened the door, Eli stood there in khakis that hadn't been pressed in weeks, and a collared shirt missing its top button. He didn't look angry, he looked tired. The kind of tired that sinks into your bones when pride and desperation finally shake hands. He didn't try to come in. "I just need 5 minutes," he said quietly. Carolyn nodded once and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. The wind lifted the hem of her sleeves. The night was damp with the smell of pine mulch and something older underneath. I didn't know about the filing until afterward, Eli said. Carolyn didn't answer. I told them it was a mistake. That going after you legally would just make it worse, but they didn't listen. You know, Lauren. You filed your own, Carolyn said calmly. His jaw flexed. Under pressure. Under your name, she corrected. He looked down. The firm wants to settle, quietly. I think we can avoid escalation if... She didn't move. I just need a short-term loan, he said, barely above a whisper. To float us while we list. We're selling the place, Carolyn. We don't want anything else, just space to exit clean. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, you hosted a party on my porch and let them laugh. That wasn't... She raised a hand, palm out. And then you came back when your porch wouldn't sell. His face tightened. This, she said, voice low, is my silence. Eli swallowed, looked past her toward the lake, then gave a single dry nod. He left without another word, and she didn't watch him go. The next morning, Carolyn called Thomas. No loans, she said flatly. No disbursements. Not to Eli, not to Lauren, not through third parties, not even under trust conflict resolution. I want all reversal clauses voided. You're locking it airtight, he said. I'm finishing what I started. You sure? She smiled, but only with her voice. I'm steady. Thomas exhaled softly. All right, it's in writing. That evening, Emily sat on the sunroom floor, laptop open, knees tucked under an oversized hoodie. The screen glowed with a spreadsheet labeled Education and Housing, 5-year Outlook. At the top of the column, the words Tuition Goal reached. Carolyn appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. Emily looked up. It's done, she said. My college account is fully funded. You don't have to rush, Carolyn replied. I'm not, Emily said. But now I get to choose the pace. That's what you gave me. She closed the laptop and took the mug, cradling it like a promise. Ruth passed by in the hallway, carrying 2 trash bags toward the bins outside. Tell her what we always say, she called over her shoulder. Emily grinned. No guilt, no guessing. Carolyn raised her mug. No going back. Across the lake, porch lights blinked off one by one. Inside the guest house, Eli's figure passed behind a window, then vanished. But in the still dark of Carolyn's inbox, a new message had arrived. No subject, no signature, only 2 lines of text. If I lose the house, I lose everything. Don't make me your enemy, attached. A scanned copy of the original deed. The one Carolyn had never released. The pen scratched faintly across the bottom of the new clause. Deliberate, final, without room for negotiation. Any legal contest to the Wells Trust shall constitute immediate and permanent forfeiture of all access, inheritance, and claims by the initiating party and all known associates. Carolyn dotted the final period like it was the end of a sentence she'd been waiting 3 decades to finish. Thomas, on the other end of the video call, adjusted his glasses. Want to keep this internal, or are we going on record? Public, Carolyn said. Let them read it in the same air they breathe. Done, he replied. It'll post to county records by end of day. She gave a single nod and closed the folder with quiet precision. It didn't feel defensive. It felt earned. That afternoon, Ruth wandered into the kitchen, hair tied back in a red bandana, still smudged with soil from weeding the back path. She spotted the updated binder resting on the counter and lifted the flap just enough to see the stamped clause inside. So that's the kill switch. Carolyn didn't look up from the sink. It's not vengeance. No, Ruth said, leaning against the counter. It's insurance. They treated age like expiration. You treated it like armor. A beat passed. Carolyn turned off the faucet. I spent years being polite while they measured my worth in what they thought I'd forget. Ruth smiled, not kindly, but with quiet satisfaction. They underestimated the wrong decade. Out on the porch, Emily sat with a printout of the revised trust on her lap, skimming the newest language line by line. Her brow furrowed as she traced the paragraph outlining automatic disinheritance tied to litigation. The air was warm but still, heavy with the smell of lake water and damp cedar. They'll never accept this, she said softly. Carolyn sat beside her, eyes focused on the tree line. They don't have to, she said. Emily folded the paper. Eli will fight it. No, Carolyn said. He'll surrender quietly, but not until he's sure no one's watching. What makes you so certain? Because guilt doesn't sleep, she said. It just moves into the guest house. Later that evening, Carolyn knelt in the soft dirt behind the lake house, fingers stained with loam, knees pressing into the cool grass. She wasn't planting anything expensive, no showy perennials, no heirloom ferns. Just a row of late-blooming coneflowers and a ring of lavender by the retaining wall, something that would keep away the deer and settle the bees. Not for them, she whispered aloud, digging another hole. This is for peace. Ruth stood a few feet away, holding the watering can like a sentinel. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Emily watched from the kitchen window, the sight of it simple but sobering. Ownership, she realized, didn't just live on paper. It bloomed in soil. At 10:46 p.m., long after the lights had gone out in the main house, Carolyn sat alone in the study, a single lamp casting gold across her desktop. Her inbox pinged. From eli.stanton.legal@protonmail.com. Subject: no subject. Message: I wish I'd stood up. I see it now. Attached was nothing, no legal form, no threat, no plea. But the timestamp told her everything. Sent 3 minutes after the county clerk's office posted the clause. She stared at it for a long moment, then closed the laptop. And from across the lake, where Eli's house now sat in quiet darkness, a car engine turned over and didn't come back. The lake house was quiet again, not the brittle, expectant hush of a storm waiting to return, but a deeper, lived-in quiet, the kind that settles only after everything that doesn't belong has finally left. Carolyn and Emily walked the shoreline barefoot, the soft hush of water kissing the sand with every step. October light danced across the surface, not sharp, but golden and low, like it understood the season had shifted. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. Near the bend where the trees cleared, a new bench sat facing the lake. Oak slats, hand-stained, bolted to a concrete base. Beneath it, a brass plaque, freshly mounted, for those who stood quietly and still stood strong. Emily knelt to brush a bit of pine pollen from the engraving. Did Ruth help pick the wording? She tried, Carolyn said, smiling faintly, but hers had the word dumbasses in it. They both laughed, easy, unguarded, light. Back at the house, the porch was dressed in late autumn stillness, flower pots brimming with dry lavender, cushions turned inward against the wind. A single throw blanket slung over the bench, like someone had just stepped inside for tea. Carolyn sat first. It felt like a reclaiming. Ruth appeared a few minutes later, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea and 1 cold can of beer tucked under her arm. To being out of place, she said, handing Carolyn the glass. And above them the whole damn time. Carolyn raised her tea. I'll drink to that. They sipped in companionable silence, the sun warming their knees. I still remember that first reunion, Ruth said. You stood at the edge of the buffet line, while Patrice pointed out your shoes like they were punchlines. Carolyn didn't blink. They were practical. They were yours, Ruth said. And that, they both understood, was the point. The old porch swing creaked once in the breeze, not from weight, but memory. Carolyn's fingers trailed over the wood grain of the railing, long since resanded and sealed by Emily's hands earlier that summer. The porch was hers again. Always had been. Lauren never came back after the filing hit public record. Not a call, not a message. Nothing in writing, nothing at all. Patrice had attempted a holiday card, gold foil and stiff handwriting, no return address. Ruth tossed it unopened into the fireplace. You said she liked the sound of her own name, Ruth said, watching the card curl into ash. Let her say it somewhere else. Carolyn nodded. She'll find new ears. They all do. That evening, Carolyn and Emily watched the sun lower itself into the lake, like it knew it wouldn't be missed. They'll still talk about it, won't they? Emily asked. Probably, Carolyn said. In circles, where silence doesn't answer back. Emily glanced at her. It doesn't even hurt anymore. Carolyn smiled, not sharp, not smug, just done. That's how you know it's over. At the next family gathering, not a reunion, not a celebration, just a polite luncheon in a beige rental hall 2 counties over, Carolyn sat in the corner sipping weak lemonade from a plastic cup. Her son's mother-in-law leaned over, lips tight with perfume and commentary. "I always thought you dressed a little out of place," she whispered. Her son laughed. So did his wife. But by the time dessert trays were cleared and goodbyes exchanged, someone finally thought to ask the caterer whose name was listed on the property title. It wasn't her son's. It wasn't his wife's. It was Carolyn's. The entire estate, under her name. Still, always. And no one laughed after that.